Welcome everyone to the second part of the lecture series, the architecture of ancient origins. Ancient origins, the ancient origins of the Haudenosaunee. I'd like to say that scholars and other notable people, not native elders, do not know how the Iroquois reached the territory where they lived for 1,000 years, which is principally southern Ontario and New York State. So I'm going to, in this lecture, make a conjecture about where they came from, based on my experience, and it's a very controversial kind of idea of migration, but it's very sensible, and it certainly makes sense of how we arrived here, instead of letting it stand as some kind of mystery. So we're opening here with a painting done under the direction of Jacob Thomas, my teacher, by the artist Coxus. This painting is the illustration of creation, the story that I told you in the previous lecture. And this is quite a literal expression of what happened in that story, done under the guidance of an elder. And I want you to notice something, that there are longhouses in the sky world. In other words, we had the longhouse as an architectural form before we came to this place, Turtle Island. We had it. It was given to us. We didn't have to invent it. Although we are called the Haudenosaunee, the people who build a long house, it's a building form that was gifted to us, if I could say so. It wasn't created by an architect, or wasn't created really by anything except perhaps the ancient original ancestor who lives up here in the sky world. This is the sycamore tree through the hole through which, this is the sycamore tree, the hole through which Sky Woman fell. Here she is falling in light, the light coming from the sky world into a dark world that is all water. We have this same description in the book of Genesis in the Bible. First there was the Word, and the Word was God. Well, think about this. There is no sound. No. There was conversation in the sky world, but coming down into this dark world, her fall is being guided and softened by the flight of birds. And I showed you a slide in the last lecture of the great meteor which fell in the Yucatan, and the illustration showed birds. And if you'll remember, they're not like any birds we have today. They're what are called pterodactyls. They're related to the dinosaurs. So they're enormous birds, and they're also like eagles. They're predatory. But these loving birds broke her fall, and she's coming down to the back of a turtle, probably something she has never seen. But here's something interesting right here. I want you to notice. What is that? When a painting is done under the guidance of an elder, everything is important. And that is a bear. And this constellation, the Pleiades, which I showed you, is a constellation about the bear being hunted. That's one of the stories that goes with this. And it moves across the sky as the Pleiades do, the bear. And when the bear is finally caught and arrows hit it, its fall, and his blood is the color of fall leaves. That's where they come from. So when we're in the forest and the leaves are turning, we say this is the blood of the bear. That's how we know it. So you can see how highly integral these stories are, and in a very simple, seemingly simple painting, there's a lot of profound knowledge. Notice too the reflection of the light from the sky world on the water, and how that reflection gives life to this watery world. You notice too that the turtle is waiting for Sky Woman, yearningly. Come, come. Just to review for you some of the names that were in the sky world. Dalon Hiwagan, the holder of the skies, the great-grandfather, what is called the first ancestor. And then Yotsisen, the beautiful, mature flower sky woman, who becomes the eldest grandmother of the moon when she dies in childbirth. And Dagawi Lagwa, gusts of wind. The gusts of wind makes Sky Woman's daughter pregnant with the twins to whisk around the ice skin, the flint, left-handed twin, and Ogri Lhasa, the new tree, the sapling, the right-handed twin. And then these two words you've been hearing, Haudenosaunee. We are the Iroquois, that's the French word for us, but we call ourselves Haudenosaunee, people who build a long house. And I am a Mohawk, and what my nation is Ganyagahaga, the people of the flint. You'll notice the left-handed twin has a flint scarf on his head. That is the blood of the twin, and we make our projectile points or arrowheads out of flint. As a matter of fact, Southern Ontario and New York State are famous for their great flint beds. They're naturally occurring, and flint is a dark stone. It's very hard, and it's very easy to work. They call it flint napping, and you hit it in a certain way, flakes come off, and it very quickly forms very sharp blades or cutting devices or projectile points, arrowheads. Very important. Okay, here we are, the beginning of this architecture of ancient origins. So, again, this is an architectural journey, and the architecture of the ancient origins is, I'm going to review with you the architecture of all of the cultures which came before us Iroquois and actually fed our understanding of architecture in their own way. The rising sun. Everything begins with the rising sun. That sun rises for every culture in precisely the same way. That is a view that every culture on earth sees every morning. So important. It's timeless and is honored by good societies as a special time. Not as sun worshippers, which the colonizer loves to label native people as sun worshippers. Of course, they honor the sun. It's not that they're worshiping it as a power. We called it the elder brother. But because it's so important that it rises. If it doesn't rise, we die. It's as simple as that. And then, of course, you have the sycamore. As above, so below. And the interesting thing about the sycamore, it has a very shallow root system. It spreads out in all directions. And so it's a fairly easy tree to uproot, interestingly enough. Now, this is from the National Geographic. This is the dominant culture's idea of migration and how it inhabited the earth. And I want you to look at this and notice all of the assumptions that are buried into this map that are untrue in the native way. One, everything comes from a single origin, which probably isn't true. And Native people believe there are several origins of the human race, so to speak. Not one in Ethiopia or one in the Middle East, which is what this map says. If you can read it, you see Africa there, and you see how all the migrational routes are coming out of Africa, which is the dominant culture belief. Then they work their way up through Europe and into Northern Europe, and then there's a stream that goes off in the other direction and goes over to what is today Siberia, and then down to Asia, and then down to Australia, and then across the Bering Strait up above, where we have Alaska. Here, right here. This is the key. Did all Native people come from an origin on the other side of the planet? I don't think so. It doesn't make sense. But this is what they say makes sense. And they come down here, and they say they came here when this was an ice shelf, but then they came to land, and then they worked their way down through North America and through the Yucatan even, and then down into the great civilizations of South America. I don't think so. I'm just saying that. Now, way out here, which is not shown, are the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii. Now, I did some studies in Hawaii with elders there, and of course they don't believe this map, because where are they on the map? It's like they don't exist. But they know they existed, and we were taught that they were great sailors, and they were able to navigate using the stars, and they could travel great distances. As a matter of fact, in Hawaii, they have stories of coming to Peru in their stories, and Chile. What's that? I don't want that. And Chile, not through the Bering Strait, but across the ocean, navigating. They're beautiful canoes, which are trimarans. They're very unique. That's their story. What about our story as Iroquoians? They don't even show us here. Interesting, huh? We have been wiped off the map. And this is a very authoritative map that's gotten published all over the world. It's not right. I'm just showing it to you because it looks like it carries so much authority. But just because something's written down or drawn does not mean it's true. It's a very hard thing to face. The world is filled with material which is untrue. And we know this now from the internet, how people can actually create a truth out of a fiction and have millions of people believing it. So we have to be very, very cautious, even prayerful, when we consider deep questions like, where did we come from? I hope that makes sense to everybody. Now, I've got a set of maps that have been done by anthropologists and archaeologists that use archaeological information to try to identify the people that were in Southern Ontario and New York State, Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula. All these places did not have those names. There is no boundary for any state. There is no boundary for two countries, nothing. It is open land, free to be wandered in by these early ancestors, 9,000 years ago. Probably even longer, but they have carbon dated some of the tools found to 9,000 years. These, we know, are hunter-gatherers, and they're foragers. They do not farm. They just roam the landscape, killing caribou and gathering things in the forest. They don't know what their language is. We have no evidence of a language being spoken. There could have been. There probably were forms of making sounds, which they used to communicate. It's very, very basic, grunting and gesturing and so forth. Those are our true ancestors. Now, 7,000 to 500, they are able to identify the language of these people, Algonquian speaking. And what they what they did is to interview native people who are extant today and find out what their ancient memory is. And this is how they were able to identify this Algonquian language, because people today, modern native people who aren't Iroquoian, they're Anishinaabe, they do speak an Algonquian-based language all the way out to Cape Breton, way out here. Okay, then all of a sudden, 500, the Iroquois-speaking farmer, hunter, gatherers arrive. We don't know how, but I'm going to tell you how I think they came. They were different than the other native people here. They're surrounded by people who are alien to them. They don't speak the same language. Iroquoian language is different than Algonquin language. They have fluid boundaries, but it's very clear they're inhabiting southern Ontario and New York State until 1600. Now, that period of 1100 years has no settlers coming from Europe. There are no settlers coming from Europe. So we pretty well have a very pure idea of how this land was occupied until 1600. It was in that period, well, actually 1492 to 1635, when Columbus came and Cartier came down the St. Lawrence. And you can see that the Iroquois speakers are all along the St. Lawrence, right up to what's Montreal today. It was called Hochelaga when Cartier met the people for just a few hours one afternoon. Then he went back to the French city, Quebec, which was called by native people Strathcona. So that's the real landscape that we're existing in. The one you see today with Cambridge and Southern Ontario and Ottawa and all that is very young. This is old. This is really old history. And it's largely forgotten by the people who live here, certainly by the governments, because it's called colonization. And so part of this course is how to decolonize yourself. Because decolonization is rude, and it leads to the senseless death of each other, which we're seeing now played out all around us in the world under the stress of the pandemic. We see senseless murders taking place in a culture war between races, blacks and Indians, and I'm saying Indians in a fun way, and white people, there, and all the different people who've immigrated here. The Muslims even are entering this, and other people from India, the Sikhs and the Hindus, and the whole thing is like a mad Tower of Babel, as the Bible says, when the whole planet will be speaking different languages instead of one. That originally we spoke one language, and we all lived in one house. It's called the Tower of Babel. And then as a punishment to the disrespect of the people, God had them speaking many languages. And then the tower crashed. And the whole world then became a splintered place. And it's the splintered place we live in today. But this is when it was all together. This is why it's so important. So, now, an architectonic migration. What is that? Well, it's showing how people built their buildings in a journey that takes us in a grand migration that's really a great circle, you'll see in a minute, that ends in Iroquois, if you can believe it. That's how central Iroquoian culture is, and I don't want to make it more important than other native cultures, but this is the one I know, and this is what I speak for. The Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Innu, and the West Coast and the East Coast, they all have their stories. But they do have commonalities, and that's what we need to do when we get together and study together. Here is the journey I'm describing. I showed it in an earlier lecture. But you see, The Yucatan Peninsula, you see the circle, that's where the great meteor fell and led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. There were no humans. So where did the human genetic makeup come from? Well, it came from the sky somewhere. Probably brought genetically on that meteor. And out of that meteor debris, we have the beginnings of the human race here. This isn't the one that's sold by the National Geographic. This is the one we know, because this is the world we knew. You see, there's no Bering Strait here. That's coming later, because the people who did come across the Bering Strait, they settled up here. They're the Cree and the Blackfoot and so forth who live here today. They look different than us. They have Asian-type eyes. We have rounded eyes, which is what all these cultures down here have in common in the people. Kind of interesting. There's the Mayan world here. And what they say, this is a rendering of South America and North America from the native mind. It is the eagle and the condor flying together. This is not a European story. This is our story. The condor and the eagle, the two great raptors of this hemisphere, now flying together. This is the symbol for the Worldwide Indigenous Network, which I'll talk about in a later lecture. And here is the turtle in its setting, with the 13 carapaces. And here is what made us distinctive. Corn. There was no corn here before acorns came. But who did have corn? The Mayas, the Mexicans, the Anasazi, everybody had corn. But there was no corn up here until we came and began to plant it, which meant that we brought the seeds here 1,000 years ago. We bought the first seeds of corn. And now corn is the primary crop on the entire planet. It is the most used crop. It's used for sugar, it's used for food, it's used for all kinds of things. The leaves are used for weaving. We have corn husk weaving, and you know, the symbolism are like our headdresses. They flow up. They're like gustoas, or what we call headdresses, gesturing to the sky world. And every culture I've shown you, starting with the Mayans, have elaborate sky beckoning headdresses. And in fact, our headdresses, even though they're quite elaborate, and I'll wear one later in the course, they're nothing compared to what they wear down in Mexico or Mayan country or the Peruvians. Nothing. They're really elaborate. And again, here is this central moment, the meteor. This is so important, I can't tell you. And yet it's almost universally ignored or turned into kind of a weird narrative told on television shows like Ancient Aliens, and just made to be a joke. This is no joke. This is what actually happened. The evidence is so profound. Now this is my teacher, Humbotzmen. He is one of the very few Mayan elders still around. He teaches Mayan culture at his own risk. The Mexican government wants to kill off the ancient Mayans, or they did, and they had a bounty on his life for many years. When he was teaching us, he had to live in a compound with high fences and barbed wire, and had dogs to protect himself from marauding Mexican soldiers. But he still kept up, and he taught us. And the first place he took us was this place called Dibble Chaltun, the oldest Mayan temple. And if you can see, the temple itself is here, and it's called the Temple of the Seven Dolls. It's a very modest temple, but it is the oldest Mayan temple. And this line here is called a sakbe. It is a straight road, a road straight as a die. Look at the other roads. And that straight road is paved with crushed white limestone, so it reflects the light at night. And then this here is a very interesting structure called the caracol. We'll see it. Why is it called the 7 dolls? Well, here are the 7 dolls right here. Those little dolls are only 3 inches high. To me, they're like the first clay figures that the good twin, Dalawidewan, he made the humans out of clay figures. This is an evocation of the first humans. Small clay dolls that then came to life. And we have those 7 dolls here in the oldest sacred site in the Yucatan. It's just astounding. And to know that these little clay dolls now hold an honored place in the museum. Because if they left them in the temple, people would just kick them around and take them for souvenirs. So they had to save them. Then this is the temple here. It faces in the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And this is a stelae. This is like the universal birthplace. The Omphalos, we'll call it. Omphalos. This is the birthing place of all people. And it's phallic, but it's also feminine in its way as well. It's all things. And again, facing the 4 directions, you see the stairs. It's so deliberate. Its meaning cannot be confused for a moment. And then off to the side is one of these pools, cenote, very deep pool that the meteor crash left in a great circle around the rim of the crater. And it's here today. And Mr. Humbasman took us there to do some offerings to what he called Hunabku, and raised his headscarf to the sky and said, "Teach us, bring us to memory all the things that we've forgotten, Hunabku, and help these people." We were there as doctoral students. "Help this people to assist us." And then he turned to me and said, "Your people have been here." I said, "How do you know?" "I can see it in you." They came down the Mississippi, and we exchanged things with them. In fact, we gave them corn. That's how they brought it home. Really? Boy, they've never told us this story before, but boy, does that make sense. And then here we are, with all of the classic sites of the Mayans. Here. The classic sites, right here, this group here, those are the oldest temples in this part of the world. Where are they? Dibble Choltun, Uxmal. You've heard of this one, Chichen Itza, and Coba, Tulum. These were the training grounds for the men, Tulum and Coba. And this is the training for the women. This was a sacred site that had what we would call chambers for teaching sexual practices. And women inhabited what they called, the Spanish called the nunnery, because they were small caves that were dedicated, each one to a woman. They thought, well, these could be prostitutes, but we're going to call them nuns, because that's what we know about women who devote themselves to their communities, but it's dead wrong. Dead wrong. Then the later sites are deeper into the forests and mountains of this area. You can still visit them. This one here, Palenque. Palenque was discovered and recorded, guess what, by a man from Hamilton, Ontario, who did it as an avocation. He's buried in the Hamilton Cemetery, but he is the original discoverer of Palenque. He's not given a lot of credit because he was an avocational archaeologist, and boy, those academics came swooping down after he discovered it, and he left elaborate notebooks and drawings, which we still have. That's our connection here, Palenque. That's our connection right here, Hamilton, Ontario. Amazing, huh? Now, you see in the background? That is Chichen Itza. Here is something called the Caracol. Now, this is a very mysterious structure. They don't know what it was for, but they've examined it carefully, and it seems there are openings around the perimeter of this that frame views of the setting and rising sun and the rising and falling of the planet Venus. Venus is their most important star. My doctoral dissertation is called De Buenaventura del Suerte. In Mohawk, it means the star, it is bright. It's Venus. My dissertation is called Venus. Now, the interesting thing about this caracol, they don't know what, it was an observation point, but all around the perimeter there is a stone wall. And it was pointed out to us by Mr. Hombotsman that there are heads of different people all around, punctuating the top row of the wall. And those heads can be identified as people from every race on the planet. They have Africans there, Chinese, of course they have native people, they have Europeans, white people portrayed there. They had a worldwide connection long, long before Columbus. And how did they get to these places? Well, probably by water. They loved water. Water was the great key to transportation. Here's the caracol, again from above. See the orderliness of it, the circle, the square, the sacred place, the stairs. It is so powerful, it's breathtaking. And then here is a heat sensing photograph of it, which they did this photograph to try to identify potential burials there, which they didn't find. There are no burials. So what does that say? Then here is a diagram showing what they did discover. The ruined stonework in the middle is the circle of the caracol, and in the center of the caracol you stand as the observer, and you can watch the sunset at equinox. You can watch the setting sun. You can watch Venus maximum southern setting, Venus maximum northern setting through these openings. It may seem like a pretty primitive conjecture, but you've got to remember these people are living under a breathtaking night sky. And just the fact of these stars, there's Venus. I mean, if you're out in the night and it's completely dark and you see that, that is special. Venus. And there's a lot more to be said about Venus, because Venus has a very interesting travel pattern. It moves in great arcs that overlap each other across the sky. It plays out an incredible geometry. And people have studied it, and they've named it and so forth. We're not going to go into that there, because that's a whole not only a whole lecture, it's probably a whole course studying Venus. But that's the world we're opening up as Iroquoians. And here I love this because this is the sun. But below, it looks like a sky, and above, as above, so below. And the line where they meet, we call the spirit line. Remembering, this is a spiritual journey as well as a physical one. And we're being spoken to in realms which aren't recordable in the Western way. Now, a denser map, moving over from the Mayan country, we're moving now into the Aztec country. and to Mexico City, which is right here. Teotihuacan. This city is stunning. When the Europeans came, it was huge. Hundreds of thousands of people lived there. How could they live all together in one place? How could we live in one long house? Well, the ancestors learned how people lived together in one place by visiting Mexico City. And there is a map of it. And one thing people don't understand is that Mexico City is actually built around a lake, which had an island in it. It was an island, and that's where the city was, on the island. And then there were incredible bridges going over to the island in 4 directions. The Spanish were stunned. They'd never seen anything like this in Europe. They had moats in Europe and castles, but not on this scale. See, here we see the island, here. And here we see the vastness of this lake. And on this island, doesn't want to cooperate with me. On this island, there's a clarified map of the island with the road system in it, because the Spanish recorded it very faithfully. I mean, they brought their missionaries and so forth who were quite adept at drawing things, and they made these early maps with all of their real names, we'll call it. These are the real names of Mexico City. Here is the Spanish rendering of it, with the center with all the sacred buildings and all around it small individual houses. And this is what the Iroquoian ancestors saw when they came down here, long before the Spanish. And then here's a painting. It's a mural. Mexico is very famous for its murals. And here we see the island. Here we see one of the bridges. And at the end of the bridges is one of the most significant pyramids in the world. But, it gets short shift to the pyramid in Giza. But when you see it here, it's bigger than that pyramid. And you see all of the people. The Mexican culture is so rich and so earth-based and so unquestionably connected. Here in the middle of Mexico City, they have a pool with an actual model of the original city. That's how much they honor it. And the 4 bridges. They don't forget in Mexico, and we forget them because we are always portraying them as very primitive. I don't think they're primitive. I think they're far advanced from the United States, for instance, which is so racist when it comes to Mexicans. Here we have the Great Pyramid of the Moon. This is the one that is bigger than Giza. But you see, it's stepped. It's not a pure triangle, it's stepped. And because it was built in stages, they built a small pyramid and a bigger one over it and another one over it until they came to the final moment. So when they excavate that pyramid, they find many pyramids inside, and they find incredible artifacts as well. But this is what the Iroquoian ancestors saw. Can you imagine coming across the landscape from Iroquois? My God. You can see in this photograph, these are people at the top of that pyramid. How small they are. And this is a drawing taken from one of the wall paintings there of the creation story, and you'll see here is a rendition of the Earth Mother and the twins. They have the same creation story we have. We perhaps got the creation story from them. After all, they experienced the meteor hit. They understood why there are twin suns. They understand why there's an Earth Mother with all trees springing from her here, and the feathers that I talked about beckoning to creation. I mean, there are books that are devoted to interpreting this very rich painting. Stunning. Now we're moving forward, we're moving upward to another mysterious culture that doesn't exist anymore, but who they never forget, the Anasazis. They're right here. And they built beautiful buildings at Chaco Canyon, which is one of the great tourist sites of the southwest of the United States. Here's Arizona today, and you can see 4 states come together right in the heart of their territory. So they have people in 4 states. Of course, they don't recognize the states, but there it is. And up here we have the Colorado River, and guess what? The Grand Canyon. This is another wonderful civilization, the Hohokam. And then this one, the Mogollon. These cliff dwellings are all open to the public if you want to visit. But there's what's adjacent to their land. The incredible Colorado River, they call it, or the Grand Canyon, which is, if you can believe it, one of the most breathtaking sights in the world. I didn't believe it until I went. Then I understood why people's jaw drops with the magnificent scale of it. The Iroquoians saw this, but there are hardly any trees here, almost none. There are almost none in Mexico and Mayan country. We had trees. Imagine what that means to us. And we had waterfalls. We didn't have a Grand Canyon, but we did have deep gorges. So we could see, the different layers of the earth like they are here, but on a much smaller scale. And here's how the Anasazi built. These beautiful multiple-story dwellings, up to 4 stories high. And if you can believe it, there are some people living in these villages even today, because the architects, the young architects of this culture, they're learning to build these in a modern way. But they still use mud brick and straw bale, which are considered the avant-garde of sustainable construction. It's not an avant-garde, it's very old. And this is a cross-section through a 3-story building with sleeping levels and storerooms and, thick bearing walls and ladders. They used ladders, not stairs. And the ladders took on tremendous meaning, because going through the hole in the floor and the ladder is emerging from creation. So every time you use the ladder, you're reenacting or rebirthing the creation story. Think about what that means. Where are the trees? This is one of their sacred kivas. And in the middle of the kiva, there's a hole, and you enter it through a ladder. Now here's an interesting thing. Frank Lloyd Wright, in his Taliesin West, had a building called the kiva. And it was a building with no windows and just an opening in the ceiling. And that's where they showed movies, if you can believe it. But he would say, we are all meeting in the kiva tonight to watch a movie. And so Wright sort of understood the power of this building party, but he just showed movies in it. Maybe he did something more in it, we don't know. But the kiva is classic. And this is Chaco Canyon. This is a plan of their elaborate built places. These arcs with small rooms and then big open spaces and then kivas in the middle of the courtyards. There's a rendering of it. Again, remembering the Iroquoians saw this. And then here is a wall painting. This is incredible. You see here, just to point out what's on the wall. This right here, that's a turtle. And look where the turtle is, at the bottom. This is where all the animals are. And guess what's up here? The twins. The twins. The turtle It's our creation story in Anasazi language, rock painting. Then we're moving across toward the Mississippi and to a mound building culture there. It was quite extensive, but you can look at this one. This is in Ohio, of all places, which you think of as a state that has no ancient history in it. Oh, yes, it does. As a matter of fact, it's just adjacent to Iroquois territory. This is Pennsylvania, but you go a little further and you're in New York State. So we have a very strong relationship. As a matter of fact, our great leader, Joseph Brant, was born here in Ohio. That is an ancient Mohawk word, Ohio. And then what we find there are these serpent mounds. And this is the recording of those in the 1800s. They were so fascinated by these ancient constructions they found. And these are the settlers and the, quote, early anthropologists. But look at the form of it. The squiggly form, it's a snake. Here they've analyzed it to see if maybe the bends in the snake are pointing to various positions of the moon and the summer solstice. You know, they figured that these were always related to the sky world. And then here you see the horned snake. I described the horned snake is what leads us to our new territory. We follow the horned snake. They look quite intimidating, but they're our friends. And here in Ontario, we have the great place of the horned snake at the Whirlpool Falls at Niagara Falls. And I was quite surprised when my clan mother got me up at sunrise one morning and said, let's drive to Niagara Falls. I need to make an offer to the horned snake. I said, really? She said, yes, I'm very confused. I have to choose a new chief, and I need guidance. So she's going to the horned snake, like 15 years ago. And I mean, I didn't question it. That was not my place to question. My place was to observe and to respect, because I loved her. And I knew whatever instruction told her to go to the horned snake, she told me it was a dream. I took it very seriously. Whereas in my Western colonized mind, I would have said, oh, she's a crazy, superstitious woman. No, I would never do that to her. I'd say the crazy, superstitious archaeologists, you know, who are constructing narratives that are not true using their methods. And I have friends who are authoritative academics who I don't trust everything they say to me. They don't like it because they think they're the supreme authority. Well, right now the world is questioning these supreme authorities, and I don't think they're going to be authorities for much longer, if I could say so. See, here's another rendering from the 19th century. People recording these ancient ruins. And here they're living in little log cabins. And here are native people who are just observing this stunning landscape of sacred buildings. And here is an artist's projection of what it looked like. This is in Ohio, very close to our Iroquois territory. Here's another illustration of it, trying to say, okay, they've named these things. There's a Grand Plaza, there are Twin Mounds, there are Monk's Mounds. I mean, these names are just pulled out of the air. You can see this is an interpretation center, and you've got their roads running through it, you know, as if it doesn't exist. Collinsville Road, whatever. I mean, this is the sad legacy of the ancient ways. And here we see again from the air at the bottom, the Serpent Mound. I mean, unmistakably breathtaking. And then we see here these kivas with the light coming from above. I want you to keep that image in mind, because in the longhouse we have smoke holes lined up down the length of the longhouse, and the the light comes in. And the light comes in and it shifts around the room. You can see here, look at the way it's here. Well, you know the sun is moving. So that bright spot is going to move around the room. And what is it going to tell us? The time of the year, the time of the day, the weather, everything. It's a great moniker of time. And, you know, the anthropologist says, oh, it's just a room with a hole in the ceiling. Come on. Don't say that. Here's an architect's rendition of the structure of the kiva, just to illustrate the beautiful order of construction. And here is another painting by Ivan Kopsis showing a young man riding the horned snake. He's riding it to the destination, to where we want to go, to our home. We're following him. Venus. And there it is. So beautiful. Calm, still lakes and forests and peace. This is our home. And that's what we built. The Longhouse settlement. Just like the Sky World. And this is the interior of the Longhouse. Not one hole, many holes. And all around us, the light is shifting and telling us the time of day, telling us what time of night it is, because those star systems were framed in these holes, so that the clan mothers would be here at the fires and they would look up. And they could see the star systems shifting across the hole in the longhouse, saying, oh, it's so beautiful. We love our longhouse. Here's a longhouse settlement with no palisades on a ridge of a river. It's just a conjecture, but you can see how they sit and rest on the landscape in these interesting juxtapositions. And we'll get into why the longhouses are in those relationships with each other. It's very complex. It has a lot to do with the ceremonies and the shifting time of the day and the seasons. They're all oriented to specific events in the sky. And of course the anthropologists, they look at that and they just say, oh, there's just a bunch of longhouses they threw together. Too rich, too subtle for your mind. And then in winter, remember, the other key to Iroquois is that we have a temperate climate. We have seasons. We have a spring and we have a fall, we have a winter, and they're very distinct and they're quite demanding. Each one is quite demanding. It's not a benevolent climate with steady temperature. No, it demands of us to understand, to shift, to change, and to appreciate the beauty of a landscape like this. And I always show the deer at the end because I'm in the deer clan. And I'm wearing a deer horn, by the way. It's right here. This is the antler that connects the deer to the Creator. And so he is our deepest guide. They're beautiful. In winter and summer, they move gracefully through the landscape. It's quite breathtaking. And they're unintimidated by the changing seasons. And they can hibernate. They can lay down and become a little ball and go to sleep for long periods of time. And they can get up and then they roam. They roam with terrible grace. And then here is a painting, we're getting to the end, by New York State painter Robert Griffin. Robert is not native, but he seems to be channeling Iroquois culture because all of his paintings are about our culture. And this is what life was like at the Longhouse Village before settlers came. There are the longhouses that Robert painted, and then this is a typical day when one of the aunties or grandmothers came out, played with the children. Children are growing. This is the father. This is the grandmother. The basket. They're weaving, doing crafts. That's what our life was like. It was beautiful. If we do it today, they call it kind of a psychodrama where we're playing. No, it's what really happened. Now, we'll end with this. Do you know what this is? I ask everybody. This looks like the serpentine snake, doesn't it? And you see the snake's head? This is Cambridge, Ontario. And the architecture school, there's the bridge, the arch bridge, and the architecture school is right here. And then you take the river down here, and it goes to Six Nations of the Grand River. This is part of the original land grant that was given to Six Nations in 1794, I believe. Right here is this road here parallels. There's a Tim Hortons here. This is where a Iroquois village used to be before they built this housing development. And I'll tell you all about it because I wrote a paper about the interpretation of it. Okay, and then of course we end with the eagle who flies high and sees the big picture. They don't see time. They see the big picture under the sun. And this is our guide, and this is what we look to, why we love eagles. So thank you very much. That's the culmination of the ancient migration. And what I'd like you to take away is just the awesomeness of the migration that the ancient Iroquois ancestors must have taken to bring corn here, to bring their lifestyle here. It's all the culmination of grand, physical events like the coming of a great meteor, and then this. And this is replicating the snake from the air. Who could see that snake from the air? Only the Creator. Or if we make a map. Oh. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. I hope everyone enjoyed the journey.